So in this section in Esther, we're going to see all of the previous pieces laid out, and we're going to see new pieces put on, and we're going to see the story unfold a little more. So our queen was disposed last week, and we have a new queen, Queen Esther, who is with the king. This is not legal rules of chess. We're just making it up as we go. But we're going to see this week, there's a new antagonist that's going to be introduced, and his foil is going to be more developed. And there's going to be an inciting incident that's going to move the plot forward and move us towards our end game. So let's read from chapter 2, verses 19 through 23. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she has done when he was bringing her up. During this time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Bigtha and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving the credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were impaled on poles. All of this was recorded in the book of Annals in the presence of the king. So, Mordecai uncovered a plot, and he saved the king's life, which is a big move. And we're going to see this doesn't play out exactly how we wanted. So Mordecai, we learned, was sitting at the king's gate, which is another phrase for being on the king's court. He was a royal official, which makes sense because in the previous section we learned that Mordecai was brought over from Jerusalem to Persia with the other nobles. So he was in a noble class. He was probably a wealthy man, which made sense that he was on the court for Xerxes. So Mordecai, who is our white knight, has been helping Queen Esther this whole time to get into position. So she's in position. Mordecai is also in position. They both have places on the king's courts. He's still protecting his queen. In verse 22, we see that Mordecai saves the king from assassination. But later, in the year 465 BCE, Xerxes does get assassinated for real. So Mordecai wasn't around to save him this time. Since Esther gave Mordecai the credit for foiling the assassination, Xerxes would typically honor people that helped him out. So you'd think he'd get a promotion, you'd think he'd get a higher status, maybe some more gold or more silver. But also, you could get a tax exemption. And if you're also a higher status, you don't have to bow to the other nobles. So when you pass a noble, you are of higher status, you don't have to bow to them anymore. We're going to see that's not the case. So as we read earlier, instead of Mordecai getting the promotion, some guy named Haman got the promotion. And it started very abruptly. So the author was intentionally throwing us off. So we see this build-up with Haman getting this increase in status because he helped the king. He did something really well and really noble. You'd think that he'd get rewarded for it. But in the next passage, someone else gets the promotion instead. So we're going to learn why, and we're going to find out how he got that status. So it's very important in Jewish literature how characters are introduced. Earlier in chapter 2, when Mordecai is introduced, he's shown as not just Mordecai the nobleman or Mordecai who's on the king's court. He's Mordecai the Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. And so likewise, we're going to see that Haman is introduced in a similar way, but oppositely. Haman is introduced as an Agagite, who Agag was the Amalekite king at the same time as King Saul way back when. So the Agagites weren't necessarily, there were people, the Agagites, but there's also a group of Agagites that were used to describe enemies of the Jews. So the Romans were called Agagites because they were enemies. So the Jews and the Agagites were seen as enemies. So when Haman is introduced as an Agagite, he is seen as the enemy. He's the black bishop. So he is in position, and he's been promoted outside of Mordecai. We're seeing that he got promoted instead, and it's causing problems for Mordecai. So what's the deal with him being introduced this way? Well, think if you're watching a play or you're seeing a movie and there's a character that his last name is Hitler and he's got a small mustache, you know he's going to be the bad guy, right? Well, that's the same thing going on. So the author of Esther intentionally listed Haman as an Agagite to show that he's going to be the bad guy. He's the one to look out for in this story. So now in verse 2 of chapter 3, we're seeing Mordecai not bowing, which makes sense if you're reading this straight through, because Mordecai got snubbed for a promotion. But there's more going on. That racial tension between the Agagites and the Israelites is going on as well. So there's two possible connections here. There's the loss of a promotion, and he's mad about it, but there's also this racial tension of Haman being an Agagite. He's frustrated that one of their oldest enemies got a promotion ahead of him too. So now let's move forward to verses 7 through 15. I'll read this for you. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, in the month of Nisan, the pure, that is the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day in a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Ammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with these people as you please." Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out the script of each province, and in the language of each people, all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all of the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. So, in verse 7, we have a 5-year time jump from what happened before. We have all of this time that Mordecai has not been bowing to Haman, and Haman has been stewing about it. He's been thinking of a way to get back at Mordecai. So, he's been planning his revenge, and now he's come to the king with a plan. First, he used the pure, which were a form of casting lots. So the pure is the Persian word, and casting lots is the Hebrew version of it. You can find it throughout the Bible. There's lots of times that people were casting lots, and basically it was these dice that they would use to get divination. They would call out to the gods, and they'd roll these dice, and whatever the dice landed on is how the gods decided for them. So we see lots of people in the Old Testament that were casting lots to make decisions, and this was a way to have Yahweh help them make decisions. It was giving the chance to him rather than making your own decision. It was a way to approach Yahweh or seek direction. The pure was cast to find the day that Haman would seek the destruction of the Jews, which was Adar, the 12th month. So he casted the lots in the first month, basically our January, and the die were cast that he would enact this plan in December. So he had 11 months to plan out how to kill all the Jews. He sought out divine help for his revenge, but we'll see that he didn't get the divine help that he wanted. As we've mentioned before, God and Yahweh are not mentioned in the book of Esther at all, but there's lots of divine intervention. So we're seeing that there's a bigger hand playing the game than what's just at face value. So Yahweh is in control of this dice casting, or the lot casting. And we're seeing that he's going to help make some changes for us. But here's the interesting thing. The die were cast on the day before Passover. So this edict was put out and the plans were laid the day before Passover. This is awful. This is like, imagine if the U.S. government made a plan to destroy or kick out all of the immigrants, the illegal immigrants, and they're going to do it 11 months from now, but the plan came out, the law was put in place on Christmas Eve. That's the same idea. So this plan was put out intentionally on the day before Passover to ruin Passover for the Jews. When Haman approaches Xerxes, he describes the Jews as a hidden enemy, and we're seeing his racism play out here. We're seeing him use some words like those people or hidden enemy or things like that to show that there's this force that's not worth having in the kingdom anymore. And so Xerxes is like, oh, sure, do what you want. That seems like a great idea. And this verse of Haman going to Xerxes shows a trend in the small book of Esther how Xerxes can be manipulated pretty easily. This is the third time that he's had an advisor come to him and make a plan for him. First, Memucan told Xerxes what to do with Vashti after she disobeyed him. And then Xerxes' attendants told him what to do to find a new queen. So we're seeing Xerxes is easily manipulated. So Haman is just following that trend of like, I can get the king to do what I want pretty easily. And the money that Haman offers is intentionally ridiculous. The author made a lavish amount of money. So I did some research and I found that Xerxes' dad got in about 14,000 talents in a year. So that's how much money he brought into the royal treasury. So Haman offered 10,000 just on his own, just to help destroy the Jews. So there's a few things about this. First off, it's pretty outlandish, and he probably didn't have this money. So if this is true, he didn't have the money. He was going to get the money from the plundering he was going to do when he killed all the Jews. So he would kill the Jews, take their money, and then give it to Xerxes to put in the royal treasury, which would be an enticing deal to Xerxes because he just had a war with Greece a few years ago and is looking to replenish his money, his treasury, because wars cost a lot of money. So he's looking to recover his funds. 10,000 talents is also about 375 tons of silver. It's an absurd amount of money. And Haman probably didn't have it. So you see how Haman is described here in verse 10. He's described as the Agagite, enemy of the Jews. He's given the king's ring, and we're basically seeing when the king gives you his ring, it's a symbol of authority. And and the signet ring is what you would use to stamp things. So they'd write a letter, they'd cover it, they'd put hot wax on it, and they'd seal it with their ring so it could be unbroken. You could see that the king wrote this. So Haman having this ring is giving Haman the authority to write letters as the king and to seal them and to make things done, which is exactly what he did. He made an edict as the king saying we're going to kill all the Jews in the Persian kingdom. We're seeing that this edict was put out on Passover Eve. We're seeing that it's going to ruin the celebrations of Passover for the Jews, and they have to prepare to either leave Persia and go somewhere, or they have to be prepared to be killed in 11 months. So this is a really hard time, and it would probably definitely ruin a Passover for people. And then to celebrate, Xerxes and Haman had a drink while the whole city's in turmoil. You can see that the last verse says the city was bewildered because they're like, why is this happening? Why would they do this to the Jews? Even if they're not Jewish, people are like, who cares? Like, why are we killing the Jews? What do they do? This is all about revenge. This is all Haman having revenge for Mordecai snubbing him. Mordecai didn't bow to him. Haman had a higher status. Mordecai either felt that he deserved it, or because Haman is just shown as an enemy, that he deserved to do it instead. And we're seeing his being snubbed is going to have revenge for the whole tribe of Israel, basically. So what's the point? Haman's petty feud has created bewilderment and confusion for the entire empire. There are those who will be without homes and families because of Haman. Xerxes had just allowed a racist with too much power to enact genocide. And for the original audience, the point of the story is, will God still protect us and defeat our enemies even when we're in exile? So the Jews are in exile because they felt like they didn't listen to God. They didn't hold up to their end of the covenant. So God kicked them out of Israel, let their enemies take them over, and now they're in Persia, and they're in exile. They're not allowed to go back. So now the question is, will God still protect us even though we failed him? Now we're seeing all of the pieces on the table. We've come to the middle of the game. There's players here, there's players there. The game is moving, and we're seeing that we're in the middle of it now. We're moving forward. We've seen the inciting incident. We've seen that there's going to be an attack on the Jews, and now we got to figure out how to solve this problem. How are we going to win the game? How is our queen, who's really on the other team, going to help save everybody? Well, here's some questions as we move forward. How often have we questioned if God is still with us when we have failed? How often in the history of humanity has God's covenants been tested? And how often has God stood by us? Will God ever give up on us and leave us to ourselves? These are some questions to think about as we move forward. And this is the questions that the Jews were thinking. They're in exile, they're lost, and now there's this edict that they're going to be killed by the government that they've been taken in by. So where does that leave them? And where is God? Well, let's close the service with an answer, possibly, from Matthew 18. Verse 12, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly, I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish. So Jesus is reminding us that God's always has us. And he reminds us that as a good shepherd, he's always protecting us. And we're really never outside of his reach. The pasture seems to be bigger than we even allow it. So even if we feel lost, even if we've wandered off, we're still in his pasture. We're still protected. So we'll see in the coming weeks that God is still protecting his people, even when they feel like they've made the mistake and they've wandered away and they've endured his wrath. How is God still going to protect them from their enemies? God will seek and will find us, even if we are the ones who wander. Because it turns out his pasture is really big, and we are never outside of it in the first place. Let's pray. God, thank you for today. Thank you for our church and for our families and for our health, and we are grateful for everything you've given us. We pray that we can be reminded that you are always with us. You are always with us on our team and beside us as we go forward. There's no one that's outside of your reach, and just like the lost sheep, you will find us and you will bring us back to the 99. Amen.